T-68, a U.S. version of the L-7, replacing the old Soviet 100mm D-10, and a General Motors diesel replacing the original Soviet diesel engine. The Israelis designated these Tiran 5 medium tanks, and they were used by reserve units until the early 1990s. Most of these were then sold to assorted third world countries, some of them in Latin America, and the rest were heavily modified, converted into the Exarit heavy armored personnel carrier. In the Lebanese Civil War, on the 10th of June, 1982, 8 Israeli M48A3S, 2 M60A1S and at least 3 M113 APCs were lost in an ambush by Syrian T-55 tanks and BMP-1 APCs during the Battle of Sultan Yaqub. The tank was heavily used during the Iran-Iraq War of 1980-88. T-54/55 participated in the biggest tank battle of the war in early 1981. Iran lost 214 Chieftain and M60A1 tanks in the battle. In return, Iraq lost 45 T-55 and T-62 tanks. 28. Another known tank battle occurred on the 11th of October, 1980, when a large Iranian destroyed Iraqi T-55 and supply truck, painted with graffiti by coalition troops, along the highway between Kuwait City and Basra, Iraq following the retreat of Iraqi forces from Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm. Convoy supported by Battalion of Chieftains, 92nd Division, was ambushed by Battalion of Iraqi T-55s, 26th Brigade. 29. During the battle, the Iranians lost 20 chieftains plus other armored vehicles and withdrew. 30. Many of Iraqi T-55s saw action during Operation Desert Storm in Iraq and Kuwait in January/February 1991, and during the 2003 US/UK invasion of Iraq with poor results. Vietnam War. An NVA T-54 tank on display in the Vietnam Military History Museum in Hanoi. During the Vietnam War, the North Vietnamese Army, NVA, used T-54s, along with its Chinese-built copy, the Type 59, extensively against the South Vietnamese ARVN and their allied U.S. forces. The NVA and the ARVN engaged each other with tanks for the first time during Operation Lam Son 719 in February 1971. During that battle, 17 M41 Walker Bulldog light tanks of the ARVN's 1st Armored Brigade claimed destroy 22 NVA tanks, a total of 6 T-54s and 16 PT-76 light amphibious tanks, at no loss to themselves, 31, 32. But their friendly units lost 5 M41s and 25 armored personnel carriers, APCs, mainly M113 APCs. 33. On Easter Sunday, the 2nd of April, 1972, the newly activated 20th Tank Regiment of the ARVN, comprising approximately 57 M48A3 pattern main battle tanks. Note that ARVN regiments were equivalent to U.S. battalions, and ARVN squadrons were equivalent to U.S. companies or troops. 34. Received reports from friendly intelligence units of a large NVA armored column moving towards Dong Ha, the largest South Vietnamese city near the Vietnamese DMZ located on the 17th parallel. At about noontime, the tank crewmen of the ARVN's 1st Squadron observed enemy armor moving south along Highway 1 towards Dong Ha and promptly concealed their tanks on high ground with a good vantage point against the enemy. Waiting for the NVA tank column to close to between 2,500 and 3,000 meters, the 90mm main guns off the pattern tanks opened fire and quickly destroyed 9 PT-76s and 2 T-54 tanks. 34. The surviving NVA armor, unable to locate their enemy's positions, hastily turned about and withdrew shortly afterwards. On the 9th of April, 1972, all three squadrons of the 20th Tank Regiment, 57 M48 tanks, fought hard against enemy armor, firing upon NVA tanks accompanied by large masses of infantry, again while occupying their strategically important high ground. This time, similarly, the Pattons opened fire at approximately 2,800 meters. A few answering shots from the North Vietnamese T-54s fell short and the NVA tanks began to scatter after suffering considerable losses and heavy casualties. By the end of the day, the 20th claimed to destroy 16 T-54s and captured one Type 59 at no loss to themselves. 35. The NVA confirmed 6 tanks were destroyed. 36. NVA armored units equipped with the T-54 tank achieved one of their greatest victories in April 1972 when the NVA 203rd Armored Regiment attacked the ARVN's 22nd Infantry Division based at Tan Con Base Camp, which dominated a main route into the city of Con Tum, located near the 17th parallel. After a two-day-long intense artillery barrage, 18 T-54 tanks from the NVA side attacked the South Vietnamese infantry camp at dawn from 2 different directions, thus breaking apart the ARVN unit in two and splitting up its forces, which quickly abandoned its positions and withdrew. 37. T-54 tank number 377 had managed to destroy 7 ARVN M41s before it was finally destroyed by M72 law anti-tank rocket launchers fielded by the South Vietnamese infantry. 38. The NVA destroyed 18 M41 light tanks together with 31 M113 APCs and captured 17 M41s as intact, while losing only 2 T-54 tanks and 1 PT-76 tank in the armored skirmish. 39. At the very end of the Vietnam War on the 30th of April, 1975, an NVA T-54 tank smashed through the opulent main gate of the RVN Presidential Palace in their capital city of Saigon, accompanied by onrushing North Vietnamese troops, at the conclusion of North Vietnam's conquering of the South. This widely seen image has come to be regarded by many as perhaps the defining moment of the end of the bloody 20-year-long conflict in Vietnam, and the fall of Republic of Vietnam and the imminent end of American participation in anti-communist activities in that region of Southeast Asia. According to the Pentagon, during the 1975 spring offensive, the ARVN forces lost 250 M48A3 tanks, 300 M41 tanks, 1,381 M113 APCs, 1607 guns, 200 RCL guns and 63,000 M72 laws. 41. During the Vietnam War, NVA tank units were involved in 211 battles, claimed 20,000 plus enemy killed, destroyed more than 2,000 enemy tanks /APCs, 870 other military vehicles, and 3,500 enemy bunkers, and shot down 35 aircraft or helicopters, overwhelmingly using T-54s. 42. The NVA lost an estimated 250. 1,972 to 150. 1973 to 1975, 100. T-54s during the war. Following the Vietnam War, Vietnam's T-54/55s and Type 59s continued to see much combat activity against neighboring Cambodia and China to their north between 1978 and 1979. Just like many developing countries around the world which continue to operate the T-54/55, at least 900 T-54s, along with a similar number of T-55s and Type 59s, are still in active military service with the Socialist Republic of Vietnam until the present day. Some of them are slated to be replaced by the more modern T-90S/SK. Ogaden War. During the largest tank battle of the Ogaden War, the Battle of Jijiga, August-September 1977, 124 Somali tanks, mostly T-55s, 43, defeated 108 Ethiopian tanks, mainly M47 Pattons and M41 Walker Bulldogs. 44. The Ethiopians lost 43 tanks during the battle. 45. Angola. T-55 in the South African National Museum of Military History, Johannesburg. T-54/T-55s began appearing in southern Africa in the late 1970s when many emerging Marxist states, particularly Angola and Mozambique, were bolstered with modern Soviet military hardware. 16. The T-55's dependability and ruggedness prove it well suited to the local combat environments. 46. Survivability of opposing medium armor vehicles deployed by UNITAR and the South African Defence Force, SADF, against late model MBs used in the Angolan Civil War remained a major concern throughout that conflict. 47. Angolan Army T-54s were first-blooded during Operation Askari, in 1981. 48. At least 5, 49, were subsequently destroyed in encounters with South African Eland or ATL 90 armored cars, and some were captured. 50. Soviet sources confirm that many T-55s were penetrated by an Eland S-90mm low-pressure gun. 51. Nevertheless, multiple heat rounds were needed to guarantee sufficient damage against a T-55's frontal arc. 52. And SADF anti-tank teams forced to operate in platoons accordingly. 47. During the Battle of Cuito-Cuanavale, another 3 T-55s of Angola's 21st Brigade were shot out by RATEL tank destroyers armed with ZT-3 Ingwe ATGMs near the Lomba River. 53. On the 9th of November, 1987, an engagement between South African and Angolan tanks occurred when 13 Oliphant Mk1s eliminated 2 T-55s in a 9-minute skirmish. 50. 54. 55. T-55s again participated in a critical engagement near Cuito-Cuanavale on the 14th of February, 1988, when Cuba's 3rd Tank Battalion counter-attacked to spare Angola's 16th Brigade virtual annihilation by 61 Mechanized Infantry Battalion Group and the 4th South African Infantry Battalion. 6 T-55s were lost, 3 to RPGs, 3 to Oliphants, 1 more was damaged, but the attack blunted the South African advance, safeguarding the cohesion of the Angolan line. Cuban and Soviet sources maintain that they destroyed 10 Oliphant tanks, 56, and 12 RATELs, 53, while South African and Western sources maintain that only 1 Oliphant and 1 RATEL were damaged, and 1 RATEL destroyed. 57. Civilians crowding atop a T-55 tank in Libya in 2011. A Macedonian Army T-55 tank and its crew, shown here in 2001. India and Pakistan. The Indian Army has used their T-54s and T-55s extensively in its conflicts with Pakistan between the 1970s to the 1980s. Pakistan also used some T-54s and Chinese Type 59 copies. 58. The first meeting of the T-55 with enemy tanks occurred in the area off Geragpur on the 22nd of November, 1971. Indian T-55 tanks, 63 cavalry, destroyed 3 Pakistani M24 Chafi tanks, 29 cavalry, inferior. 59. On the 10th of December, 2011, during the Battle of Nanakot, Indian T-55s, 14 cavalry Sindhi horse, in 2 battles destroyed 9 Pakistani M47/48 tanks, 33 cavalry, without any loss. 60. Battle of Basantar or the Battle of Barapind. The 4th of December, 2016, 1971, was one of the vital battles fought as part of the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971 in the western sector of India. India had destroyed close to 46 M48 tanks, 61, 62, and losing only 10 tanks in the process. At the end of the war, one of the last tank battles took place in the Nayagon area. An M24 company attacked Indian T-55s, but lost 5 Chafi tanks and was forced to retreat to Bogra. 63. Other conflicts. T-54 tanks, 64, were used during the Cambodian Civil War and the Cambodian-Vietnamese War between the 1970s to the 1980s. 65. During the Ugandan-Tanzanian War of 1978 to 1979, Libya sent an expeditionary military force to aid Ugandan dictator Idi Amin in his conflict with Tanzania, which included a supply of a few dozen T-54/55 tanks. Some of these tanks saw action against Tanzanian forces, 66, with at least limited success. Polish T-55L tanks were deployed during the imposition of martial law in their country to intimidate the population, seemingly growing ever more anti-communist, and to suppress overt displays against the communist government. 67. The T-55 was the most numerous tank of the Yugoslav People's Army, JNA. It was the mainstay of armored combat units during the Yugoslav wars, where it proved vulnerable to infantry equipped with anti-tank rockets and weaponry and to mise employment in urban areas and unfriendly terrain. But there were too many of them in service for them to be replaced entirely. During the Battle of Vukovar, where the JNA grouped a large part of its tank force, a number were destroyed, almost exclusively by infantry-carried anti-tank weapons. The T-55 tank remained the most common tank in the armies of the various Yugoslavian successor states until recently, and it was the most used tank by all armies during the decades-long wars. T-55s were also used by Yugoslavia in the Kosovo War and in Macedonia during the 2001 insurgency in Macedonia, and by Russian peacekeepers after the withdrawal of Yugoslav forces from Kosovo. The Kosovo Liberation Army, National Liberation Army of Kosovo, captured a T-55 from the Macedonian army during the Battle of Rajua. 68. Yugoslav T-55 tank captured by Croatian army during the Croatian War of Independence is now displayed in city Valpovo, Croatia. The T-55 has been used by Ethiopia in the conflict with the Islamic Courts Union in Somalia and used by various warring factions in the Somali Civil War after the fall of the dictatorial Shahid Bara regime in the 1990s. China produced thousands of Type 59 tanks, based on the Soviet T-54, for the People's Liberation Army, which were used during the Vietnam War and used en masse against Vietnam in the Sino-Vietnamese War, and sold the similar, but upgraded, Type 69 tanks to both Iran and Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War between 1980 and 1988. A considerable number saw action against coalition forces during Operation Desert Storm in Iraq and Kuwait in January and February 1991, and during the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, Operation Iraqi Freedom, with extremely poor showing against more modern tanks fielded by U.S. and British troops, such as the M1 Abrams and the Challenger 1 and Challenger 2 tanks. The Sri Lanka Army used Czech T-55 M2s, heavily modernized variants of the Soviet T-55, during the Sri Lankan Civil War, which had concluded by May 2009, against the LTTE, Tamil Tigers, terrorist group. At-55 belonging to the LTTE was destroyed by the Sri Lankan military on the 6th of April, 2009, and according to local media reports, it was a model produced in Czechoslovakia and obtained by the LTTE in either 2001 or 2002. T-55 tanks have seen use on both sides of the 2011 Libyan civil war, with anti-Gaddafi forces either stealing them or having them contributed by defecting members of the Libyan army. T-55s have been used by the Sudanese armed forces during the conflict in South Kordofan and Blue Nile. At least 4